German Antitrust Act passed during the Gilded Age was not, nearly as, the Sherman Antitrust Act did not place nearly as great of regulations as the Clayton Antitrust Act, which passed during the Gilded Age. But at the same time, it was still the first antitrust regulation ever passed by the government. So understand that, like, when people use this term laissez-faire for the Gilded Age, it's not really that helpful in describing. But again, it's just from the progressive era looking back and seeing less government regulation, because the biggest difference when you look at, the 1880s versus the 19 teens, okay, is that during the 1870s, 1880s, the government's most important, objective is the regulation. Not the 1880s, the government's most important objective is the promotion of business, the support for big business. Okay, business is growing, the government saying, what can we do to support big business? Now, that can go overboard after a while, because again, government policy is really not laissez-faire. In fact, you've got a lot of corruption as far as bribes and deals between business and government, the credit mobilier scandal, this cartoon, The Bosses of the Senate. Okay, when we look at this political cartoon that often finds ways onto exams and stuff like that. Let me see what we can find here. Yeah, this is a cartoon called The Bosses of the Senate. And what this is you see here where they're saying, okay, we've got all of these monopolists. Here's the entrance for the monopolist. And you see the people's entrance is closed, okay? And so this is a Senate of the monopolist, by the monopolist, for the monopolist. So this drives home the idea that a lot of Americans in the 1880s and 1890s, they're thinking in terms of government is just being controlled by big business, all right, that big business is calling all the shots and that the government is not, taking care of the people. Now, when we go to Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, Teddy Roosevelt says that he's going to give Americans a square deal. Okay, so a square deal, which basically means that he's not going to take sides. Okay, that he's going to give Americans a square deal between government and business. Now, another thing about Teddy Roosevelt, he gets that trust buster nickname from the Northern Securities case. And so, this is something that they call him a trust buster, but at the same time, when we look at his actual record, and we look at, okay, is he, actually busting all of these trusts? He's actually being a little bit mindful about, is this a trust that's necessarily against the public interest? Because something to note here is Teddy Roosevelt never goes after Standard Oil. Now, as much as Ida Tarbell can complain about some of John D. Rockefeller's competitive practices, when it comes down to it, like the average consumer, okay, because of John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, then oil was cheaper and oil was better, okay, because before John D. Rockefeller came along, and we think in terms of Standard Oil, okay, what this means is that the oil, it meets a certain standard. You don't have to worry about it blowing up in your house or something like that. I mean, there would really be times where somebody lights the oil lamp and bam, it's just gone, okay? And so as far as that goes, that's what we're looking at there. And John D. Rockefeller, it's like when you buy Standard Oil, you can trust it, okay? Which today, I'm sure, when you think about it, let's go ahead and let me just do a little poll here. What best describes, okay, how you prefer to buy gasoline, okay? So as far as that goes, I prefer to buy a brand that I trust, or I just buy whatever is cheapest, okay? So let's see what what we have here as far as of course, y'all are high schoolers. We have to think about like the point of view that you probably want to, but as far as that goes, okay, interesting. We've got an interesting kind of mix here that, there's something about, even when the gas prices are high, for a lot of people, there's something about like just knowing that, okay, this is a brand of gasoline and I think this is good. But, we've got about 50-50. This is really interesting just to see how this little discussion here is evolving. Okay, so we see here that that's interesting. Okay, we've got it changing a little bit. Wow, now it's about 2-for-1. But part of that too is I think that today there's more regulation in terms of like, there's going to be more inspections and there's got to be a certain quality if you're even going to sell gasoline in this country. Whereas back then that may not have been, the same kind of case there. So going from here, let's go ahead and see if we've got any other questions coming up. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this session is going to be a little bit abbreviated, and I'm just going to just reiterate the apology. I just started a little bit late. I was having some difficulties. So the start of the Gilded Age. Okay, so basically the so-called Gilded Age. And again, that's just a term that the author Mark Twain came up with that just stuck. And this is basically the end of the Civil War to around 1900. Okay, we typically think about the Progressive Era as 1900 to 1920. That now some people might stretch it back to 1890, but as far as that goes, usually when I'm thinking about the the barrier between, to the extent that there is one. Now, remember, like people who were alive at the time, like, when it turned like 1900, 1901, they're not thinking that like, hey, I'm, all of a sudden it's not the Gilded Age anymore. It's the Progressive Era, right? And so this is something that these are terms that historians use. So 1865 to 1900. And of course, some of it's going on already because we want to note that some of this has its roots in the South secession from the Union. When we consider this, that the South seceded from the Union, and all of a sudden the Republicans had a pretty massive majority in Congress to be able to, to do whatever they were going to do there, such as increase the tariff, pass the Pacific Railroad Act, and then, give out land grants so that farmers could settle out in the West in places like Kansas and Nebraska and the Dakotas. So as far as that goes, the economic changes or developments, this is the time when the United States, before the Civil War, the North is certainly industrializing, right? The Northeast especially. But what we're going to see during the Gilded Age is that the United States economy is going to be based on industry and business rather than on agriculture. Okay, so when we look at the United States before the Civil War, that, cotton agriculture is still kind of the backbone of the United States economy, even though the Northeast is industrializing and in the Northwest they are, farming. You got John Deere steel plow, in that market revolution kind of time where it's making it possible to have agriculture in the old Northwest or the Midwest. But this is something that the national economy is, now moving in a direction of industry and business. And, farmers are kind of getting left behind, at this time, because this is a time where the farm economy is, is somewhat unstable because of mechanization, and that sort of thing. Now, of course, the Southern economy after the Civil War, has, its own laundry list of problems. So going from there, again, this is a point where where federal government policy is focusing on helping the development of business. Henry Clay would have loved to see what he saw during the Gilded Age because, finally the government is putting the development of business first. All right. And so as far as that goes, let's see about this. I think that the Gilded Age is about as much of a break from the antebellum era that you could have. I mean, I'm thinking about a lot more changes rather than continuities. And that's in terms of especially as I was saying that the South was during the Gilded Age the South has become an impoverished defeated area, and their economy is still largely based on agriculture, even though the South is starting to open its arms to some industry. You've got Birmingham, for example, the steel industry that starts in Birmingham. So with that, and then also remember that government policy during the Civil War was not really geared toward helping industry to grow, whereas after the Civil War, government policy is very much doing that. Okay, so the foreign policy during the Gilded Age, Nina, I would say that this was just not a very big foreign policy period. The United States, of course, is still, trying to procure land, but, given that the 48 states are already that's already there, that you've got the Alaska Purchase in 1867. You've got the United States starts to purchase some islands in the Caribbean. Okay, so there is some focus on continued expansion that's kind of setting up the age of American imperialism, which I guess properly begins in 1898 with the annexation of Hawaii and the Spanish-American War. So one thing, yeah, that the Gilded Age, when we're looking at that time between, I mean, really, if we go from the for APUSH as a survey level course, there's really not a lot of foreign policy between the iteration of the Monroe Doctrine in 1823 until 1898 in the Spanish-American War, the annexation of Hawaii. Now, of course, you've got a few things going on there, like if we consider the Mexican-American War a matter of foreign policy, but I mean in terms of foreign policy abroad. Okay, and of course, during the Gilded Age, you have the first immigration restriction in U.S. history in the 1880s, the Chinese Exclusion Act. So that is, of course, going on as well. But foreign policy is going to become a thing more in the 20th century. We'll start to see another, foreign policy kind of focus there. All right. So as far as that goes, yeah, and that, Elroy, you kind of hit on the irony there that Teddy Roosevelt was considered a trust buster, but noting that William Howard Taft actually pursued trust a bit more aggressively than Teddy Roosevelt. But I think it was just perhaps it's because Teddy Roosevelt was doing it first. Teddy Roosevelt was the first president that is trying to bust up trust under the Sherman Antitrust Act. But again, Teddy Roosevelt, if he didn't see any reason to go after it, he wouldn't. So when you think in terms of Standard Oil, for example, that, as much as somebody, Ida Tarbell can critique, Rockefeller's competitive practices, then, it's a situation where, we've got, this is the, John D. Rockefeller, did he do anything? Is he doing anything that's hurting anyone? As far as that goes. So with that, policies, okay, Mac Films on YouTube, okay. So asking as far as that goes, that what were the biggest differentiations, okay? And again, the biggest thing is going from during the Gilded Age, the government promotion of business, government support for business, and then going into the progressive era, government regulation of business. And then also, the Sherman Antitrust Act, which also was a lot more times used during the Gilded Age to bust up labor unions. That's why the Clayton Antitrust Act said that they are not going to, they exempted labor unions from the Clayton Antitrust Act. So as far as that goes, but again, that Teddy Roosevelt, I think he just kind of had some better PR. But yeah, it was actually Taft that went after Standard Oil. So as far as that, by the time Taft's busting trust, it's already old news, right? And so, when that everyday lives more of a, Elroy, I don't know if I'd use the term I wouldn't try to use the term monopoly again, but we do want to note how political machines, took advantage of immigrants that were coming in. Basically somebody, meets them off the boat and says, hey, we're going to help you find a job. We're going to help you get settled in. We're going to help you do this and this. We're going to give you a place in the community. But then when election day comes up, here's the ticket. Make sure that you're voting for our people. And so that's something that basically Boss Tweed and the Tweed Ring, you'd have these corrupt politicians that they are using their political patronage, that you're electing me, so I'm making sure to put, these people in the Democratic Party who helped me to get to my position here. I'm returning the favor and I'm putting them places, and then we're making sure that people get jobs and they're making sure that people vote for us. So remember that the progressives, one of their things was that they were against, the progressives were against any kind of these political machines. They believed that these were getting in the way of proper democracy. All right. So as far as that goes, let's see. That's interesting. What modern giants might you compare to Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan? I would say like today, of course, you've got, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates. Those would be some of the people that I would be among the first to compare. And, and again, and another thing to think about too is when you think about Bill Gates, is someone who is probably known by your generation more for his charity work. Okay. Like you don't really have much of a memory of Bill Gates as the CEO of Microsoft. Okay. It's like he hasn't been managing Microsoft for a long time. Let's see. When did Bill Gates step down as CEO or chairman or whatever? Okay. So president, chief software architect, also its largest individual shareholder until May of 2014, it looks like. Okay, so, or actually 2000. Okay, so stepped down as the company's CEO in 2000. So as far as that goes, Bill Gates has really been doing more charity work than CEO work for, the entirety of your lifetimes. But in the 1980s, 1990s, Bill Gates was the CEO of Microsoft. And Bill Gates has been heavily involved in philanthropy. Now, that's the other thing that we want to think about is like Gilded Age philanthropy. This was a time when you didn't have income taxes. And so the main tax during the Gilded Age was the tariff. And so with that, there weren't income taxes. So when somebody got their income, that was, they got to keep it all. Like there was no income tax or anything like that. And so coming from there, when you're looking at, somebody like Carnegie or Rockefeller, there's kind of an expectation, you have amassed all this money. Can you do something to help society? And so, that's where you've got basically when we think about philanthropy, it's not charity. I think philanthropy is more of a social investment. Okay. That, philanthropy is typically going to cover like three areas: education, the arts, and public health. So when Carnegie built libraries, Carnegie built thousands of libraries because as a kid, he loved to read. And so he was like, I want kids to be able to read because of me. Okay. And so he builds all these libraries: Carnegie Hall, the arts, Carnegie Mellon University, education. Bill Gates, with all of his efforts to, bring clean water to these communities in South Asia, to make sure that, there are vaccinations available to people in third world countries. Bill Gates, has become something of a philanthropist, something that the person has made all this money and they are trying to do something good for society. I have speculated before, like, Elon has gotten a lot of flack for, his stuff with Twitter and everything. But I really do think that Elon Musk's intention in taking over Twitter was as much of a philanthropy intention as a business intention. Okay. Because in Elon, now agree with him or not, but in Elon Musk's viewpoint, Twitter, which had started as a public space, was becoming somewhere that, was no longer feeling like a public space where everybody can just go in. Like there was just so much that was being policed. And, Elon Musk said, let me go in there and see what I can do. Now, we'll see how that goes for him. But I think that even though that hasn't been like a charitable gift per se, I think at the end of the day, like, I don't think he's going to end up making, now, who knows, down the road, maybe he will. But I think his primary intention in taking over Twitter was to try to restore Twitter as a place of, just basically a public forum. We'll see how he does with that down the road. Of course, there are going to be some things that'll be tough for him in the short run. So with that, can I touch on, yes, social Darwinism? And a lot of people, social Darwinism is something that's often oversimplified and misunderstood. Social Darwinism is not just like, oh, just let the poor die or something like that. Social Darwinism is a philosophy that's really, if any of y'all took AP Euro last year, it's kind of a continuation of classical liberalism, the idea that non-intervention is going to result in the most progress for society. So when you look at Darwinian evolutionary theory and that sort of thing. So when we're looking at, Darwinian evolutionary theory, that these things just happen and the survival of the fittest, who is going to adapt best to the changes in the environment. And so social Darwinism says that the government should not step in and should not have high taxes and high regulations, because when you have high taxes and high regulations, that means that the people who are in the best position to advance society, they can't act. Okay. So again, social Darwinism isn't like poor people die. Okay. It's, look, don't go in and tax Rockefeller and Carnegie too much, because these guys have shown that they are the most fit to be able to operate in the world as it is right now. And if we just let them do their thing, everybody's going to be better off. And now that is, you can take that or leave it, but basically social Darwinism says that competition is a good thing, that competition is a good thing for society. Whereas in the progressive era, there is more of a focus on what can we do to cooperate with each other, So, that's where, this idea of just like the completely free market, progressives aren't really so much into that. So as far as that, ladies and gentlemen, again, I'm sorry that this has been an abbreviated session. I will make sure I'll double and triple check the stream tomorrow and make sure all of that's working. So tomorrow, our review is going to focus mostly on foreign policy. Okay, so we've been, looking at a lot of domestic policy things tomorrow. And again, I will, do my best to make sure that we start at the stated time of 6:30. Thank y'all for bearing with me. Those of y'all that are watching now, thank y'all for, coming back and taking a look. And I will be here tomorrow at 6:30. And ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure.